There is belief, and then there is skepticism. And between the two lies a vast territory of questions and the unknown. But what if reality is far more complex than we've been willing to perceive? And what if the stories we dismissed as mere myth and legend hold the keys to understanding consciousness? From ghostly encounters to lights in the sky, humanity has always sensed there was something more out there. Some call it the paranormal, and others call it the divine. Some look to the stars for answers, while others search within. Philosophy asks why, theology asks who, science asks how, and we ask ourselves, what if? We stand at a meeting point, a place where the fabric between realities is thinner than you might think. This is Crossroads of the Veil. We find ourselves standing on the edge of a river. The current is swift and the water is black, and a mist obscures the other side. This isn't just any river. It acts as a boundary, separating the comfortable lies we tell ourselves and the unsettling truths that we spend our lives trying to ignore. It is a place of decision and a point of no return. And on this bank, a story unfolds, a drama so simple and stark that it has ingrained itself into our culture and echoes through the generations. It's a story you think you know, but its origins are a carefully constructed illusion, pointing to a fundamental flaw in the human design, and possibly in our very soul. The setup is familiar. A scorpion finds itself trapped by a rising river. It cannot swim, and its survival depends on the help of another. It spies a frog on the bank and asks for passage to the other side. The frog, understandably hesitant, replies, "How do I know you won't sting me? It is your nature." The scorpion, a master of cold, calculating logic, presents its case. "Because if I sting you, I will drown too, and where is the logic in that?" The frog considers this for a moment, and the logic seems sound. It seems like a perfect example of mutually assured destruction, the very principle that holds our fragile world in balance today. And so, against its better judgment, and the primal warning screaming in its head, the frog agrees. The scorpion climbs onto its back and they set off into the current. Halfway across, in the deepest part of the channel, as the far bank starts to come into sight, the frog feels a sharp, searing pain in its back, a white-hot agony that spreads like fire throughout its body. The scorpion has stung, and the venom courses through its veins, its limbs growing heavy and its kicks becoming feeble. The frog asks why. Now we both will die. And the scorpion, as it sinks into the dark waters, replies, "I couldn't help it. It's my nature." 3 words that negate logic, self-preservation, and hope. The 3 words that suggest some forces are unchangeable, and some natures are fixed, and some destinies are inescapable. This fable has become our go-to parable for betrayal, for trusting those who are hardwired to harm. We use it to explain the inexplicable actions of toxic partners, treacherous colleagues, and self-destructive leaders who bring their own empires crashing down around them. It has become a type of shorthand for the darkness we sense in others. But the real hook, the thread that pulls you under, is the story isn't what it seems. And the question it forces us to ask is not just about the scorpion's nature, but about our own. Why do we, like the frog, repeatedly accept the scorpion's ride? Why do we, as individuals, as societies, and as a species, continually participate in our own undoing, even when we know the sting is coming? We see the scorpion on the riverbank of our lives, we hear its flawless logic, and yet we let it climb onto our backs. Why? To begin, we have to start with the source. It feels ancient, a piece of primordial wisdom passed down from the mists of ancient Greece, whispered by slaves and philosophers alike. However, research reveals the fable is not in any pre-20th century collections. Its first known appearance emerges in a 1933 Russian novel titled The German Quarter, and its entry into the Western consciousness was made by Orson Welles, who recounted it in his 1955 film. well cemented the fable's place in our psyche, giving it a gravitas it hadn't earned through the age. A story that we treat as a timeless wisdom is in reality a piece of modern mythology. Born in the political landscape of the early Soviet Union, it forces us to ask, why did this specific version of the story emerge? What was it about that time and that place that required a new parable of inescapable doom? There are older similar tales, particularly a 15th century Persian tale of a scorpion and a turtle, but in this version, the moral is quite different. The turtle gives the scorpion a ride, but halfway across the river it feels the scorpion trying to sting its shell. The turtle, realizing the scorpion is acting out of malicious and a compulsive nature, speaks. "Friend, your attempts to harm me are pointless against my shell, but they have revealed your true heart. To carry you to the other shore would be to unleash a plague upon the world." And with that, the turtle dives down, drowning the scorpion. The lesson of this ancient tale was one of prudence and recognizing evil and acting decisively to protect the innocent. It was a story of empowerment. But the modern versions, the one we know, shifts the focus entirely. It becomes a tragedy of mutually assured destruction, rooted in an unchanged nature. The frog is no longer a wise judge, but a victim of flawed logic. The shift is profound. It suggests that sometime in the last century, we as a collective society became more interested in the idea of an inescapable, self-defeating character than in the wisdom of avoiding it. We traded a story about vigilance for a story about victimhood. The real question is why, and what has changed in us. The fable of the scorpion and the frog does not exist in a vacuum. It is part of a trinity of modern folk wisdom that we use to explain the repetitive patterns of human behavior. Once you see them together, you will have crossed a threshold. You will begin to see the architecture of our failures and the blueprint of our own demise. The first pillar is the fable itself, the inherent nature. It whispers that some of us are scorpions, compelled to sting even when it leads to our own demise. It is the story of a character flaw so deep that it overrides reason, a kind of black hole from which logic cannot escape. It is a belief for some biology or perhaps something darker, destiny, is at work. The second pillar is from philosopher George Santayana. It is almost always misquoted as, "Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it." But what he actually wrote in 1905 was, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." The difference is crucial. It's not about learning an intellectual lesson. It's about the cognitive failure to retain and integrate the experience. It's about historical amnesia. This is the reoccurring history. It takes the scorpion's individual, unchangeable flaw and scales it up to the level of civilization. It suggests that empires fall not from external threats, but due to an internal, reoccurring memory error. The third pillar is the modern adage of insanity, almost always misattributed to Albert Einstein. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Its origins lie in the literature of a 12-step addiction recovery program from the early 1980s. This is the flawed action. It describes a moment-to-moment behavioral loop, the broken feedback circuit in the human mind that powers the entire system of self-sabotage. The inherent nature, the recurring history, and the flawed action. Together they form a blueprint for our own self-destruction. They suggest that the insanity of repeating failed action is driven by an inherent nature, and the failure to break individual loops, the condemnation to repeating history. So we are looking at a simple 3-part diagram that may explain everything from our failed relationships to the fall of empires. And the most disturbing part, the repeated telling of these ideas only proves their own point, because we have forgotten their true origins, simplified their meanings, and we present them as ancient truths. Our very use of these phrases demonstrates the principle of forgetting and the repetition that they describe. We are the proof of the very problems we're trying to solve. Let's return to the scorpion's final words. It's my nature. The real horror comes from admitting you are powerless against a built-in programming. It suggests free will is an illusion. And this idea has resonated with some of humanity's oldest and most powerful concepts. This is where the mystery turns into a spiritual one. A question not just for the mind, but for the soul. Consider the Christian doctrine of original sin. It states that humanity is born with an inherent flaw, a sinful nature that inclines us towards evil. a path we cannot escape on our own. This isn't about specific actions, it's about a fundamental state of being. The scorpion, guilty by its very nature, is the perfect embodiment of this concept. It discards the idea of a clean slate and suggests that our destructive tendencies are not learned, but are a built-in part of our existence, a spiritual stain on the human condition. However, if we look further east to the Vedic and Buddhist traditions, you will find the concept of karma. This is the cosmic law of cause and effect, where the actions, thoughts, and intentions of a soul determines the circumstances and nature in future lives. Within this framework, the scorpion's character is not a random accident of birth. It is a direct result of the evil deeds committed in past existences. The fable then becomes a story of a soul trapped in the cycle of reincarnation, endlessly repeating patterns of causing harm and living out the consequences of those past actions. Its nature is not by chance, it is destiny that has been forged over lifetimes and a debt that must be paid. And the idea of reincarnation was not foreign to Western philosophy. The earliest Judeo-Christian sects taught about the pre-existence of souls, suggesting that reincarnation was a well-known concept. It was a model for the soul's educational journey. But those teachings were declared heresy at the Second Council of Constantinople in 553 AD. And this wasn't just a theological debate, it was a political one. A timeline with a single judgment gives immense power to the institution that claims to be the only way to salvation. The Church suppressed this doctrine, replacing the reoccurring journey with a single path leading to one final judgment. This was a pivotal moment. What if this doctrine had survived? Would belief in karma have tempered the zeal of the Crusades and the horrors of the Inquisition? Would a leader who believes they might be reborn as one of their victims still act in the same manner? When we view the fable through a historical lens, it gains a new layer of meaning. The scorpion is trapped in a cycle of being a scorpion, and the frog is trapped in a cycle of being a victim, until one or both can learn the lesson required to transcend their karmic nature. The story is no longer a simple grim end. It is one of a much larger, unseen cosmic wheel, imbuing the tale with a sense of profound long-term consequences. The sting is not just an act, it's a sentence being served, and the river is wider than we could have ever imagined. We have seen the scorpion's nature as an example for an individual. Now switch from the personal to the societal, from the metaphysical to the historical. This is where we see the scorpion's destructive nature reflected on the grandest scale, the history of civilization itself. And the warning, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, is not a warning about forgetting facts in a history book. A society that fails to build upon the foundation of retained memories is trapped in a state of perpetual infancy. It will be condemned to repeat the same behaviors because it has forgotten any other way of being. It is a civilization with Alzheimer's, endlessly replaying its own worst moments. Ancient civilizations understood this intuitively. Their cosmologies were often reoccurring. The Aztecs, for example, believed their world was but one in a series of creations and destructions. Their 52-year calendar cycle was a source of profound anxiety. It was an acknowledgement that history was a pattern doomed to repeat itself, and that principle was clearly demonstrated there. But we don't need to look to ancient myths to see this in action. We need only look at our own, documented modern history. And sometimes the truth is hidden in plain sight, in documents that were once classified and sealed away from public view. Consider this chilling and documented fact. After World War II, as the Cold War was beginning, the U.S. intelligence agencies, including what would become the CIA, faced a problem. They needed operatives experienced in fighting communists in Eastern Europe. And the most experienced anti-communists of that time were the former Nazi collaborators and war criminals, men who perfected the arts of torture and suppression by any means necessary. And despite knowing the horrific nature of these individuals, despite having just fought a world war to defeat their ideology, American intelligence launched programs like Operation Paperclip. They employed thousands of former Nazis as spies and assets, actively recruiting them and sanitizing their records. They made a deal with the scorpion. This logic was eerily familiar to the frogs. We need them to fight the greater threat. Their nature is distasteful, but their skills are useful. They won't sting us because they need our protection. They saw the scorpion, but they chose to believe its rational argument. And you might ask, what were the results? These assets often proved unreliable, instead continuing their patterns of deceit and sadism. They created intelligence networks that were corrupted from the start. They embarrassed the United States when their pasts were finally revealed, forcing a moral reckoning and distrust that continues to this day. The sting was predictable. The failure to remember the nature of these individuals condemned these agencies to repeat a catastrophic and strategic failure. The ruin of any empire is not a single event. It is a series of small, forgotten lessons until the whole civilization sinks beneath the waves. The pattern is the same, only the scale is different. Now we confront the engine of it all, the flawed action. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We've all heard it at one time or another. We have all attributed it to Einstein. But the true origin is the key to its terrifying power. This phrase first appeared in a 1981 Narcotics Anonymous pamphlet. It was not born into the world of physics, but in the visceral reality of addiction. In that context, it's not just a clever saying, it's a clinical diagnosis from hell. The addict is literally trapped in a repeating cycle of self-destruction, using a drug, desperately hoping for a different result. They hope for control, for happiness, and for an escape. But in reality, the results are always the same: pain, loss, and despair. Their very own actions create the outcome they fear and dread the most. This is what drives the scorpion to sting. In clinical terms, this isn't insanity. It's more like being stuck in a loop, like a broken record forever skipping in your head. Old traumas or relationship patterns might be unconsciously replayed in new situations. A person who grew up with an emotionally unavailable parent might repeatedly seek out unavailable partners. They are doing the same thing by choosing an unavailable person and expecting a different result, finally achieving the intimacy they were denied. They are unconsciously trying to master the unresolved pain. They are failing to remember the lesson of their past, and so they are condemned to repeat it, not on the stage of history, but in their own heart. They keep casting the same actor in the same role, hoping for a different ending. But that script was written long ago. The sweeping cycles of history are powered by these small loops of flawed actions. The ruin of an empire begins with a single self-defeating choice, multiplied by millions. The scorpion doesn't just represent a type of person, it represents a process, a glitch in the machine that can trap any one of us. The river isn't just a physical obstacle, it's the flow of our own lives. And the current pulling us under is the force of our own compulsions. Consider the world of paranormal investigation. Organizations like MUFON, collecting thousands of reports, investigators documenting reoccurring patterns, UAPs in specific geographical hotspots, and repeated appearances of strange lights. The investigation often involves using the same methods: cameras, recorders, sensors, repeatedly capturing ambiguous data. The results are always tantalizing but never conclusive. And yet, the hope remains that the next time the results will be different. Next time, the photograph will be clear. Next time, the recording will be undeniable. Next time, the data will provide definitive proof. Does this sound familiar? This is an observer's loop. It's a form of the insanity adage where the repetition is in the act of looking, fueled by the hope of a different result. This raises a critical question. Is the repetition inherent to the phenomena itself, or is it a result of the act of observation? Is the insanity in the intelligence behind the phenomenon, or is it in the human projecting a pattern? Are we truly discovering signals, or are we merely imposing connections with random noises, driven by a desire for a signal to exist? Scientists use radio telescopes to listen for artificial, structured signals amidst the vast noise of the cosmos. They are doing the same thing, observing a patch of sky, analyzing a frequency, and hoping for a different result. A single signal that proves that we are not alone. Our need to find meaning might be the very thing that prevents us from seeing the truth. What if they are not objective realities, but phantoms created by our own pattern-seeking minds? What if we are the ghosts in our own machine? We have reached the core of the enigma, and it resembles a set of Russian dolls, each containing a deeper, more personal truth. At the very core, the smallest doll is the insanity adage, the engine of repetition that powers the entire system. It is a twitch in the machine. The middle doll, containing the first, is the fable of the scorpion and the frog. It gives motive and meaning to the psychological loop. It answers why the loop exists, because of an inherent destructive nature. The scorpion's nature is the fuel for the engine of repetition. It is the ghost in the machine. And the largest outer doll, containing them all, it describes the collective results when millions of individual scorpions and frogs play out their dramas on the world stage. The repetition of wars, tyrannies, and collapses is the insanity loop scaled up to the level of civilization. It is the machine itself, endlessly churning out the same tragic history. And this is the moment of truth. It explains why the frog accepts the ride, a momentary lapse in judgment, a compulsion to trust when it shouldn't. It explains why the scorpion stings, an inherent nature, a karmic debt, a psychological compulsion. And it explains why their mutual destruction is not an isolated event, but a pattern that echoes from the smallest personal betrayal to the ashes of a fallen empire. We are all on that river. We are all at times the frog, paralyzed by flawed logic. And we must face the possibility that we are also at times the scorpion, driven by forces within us that we do not understand and cannot control. The sting is not just an event. It is an inevitable outcome of a system that is utterly indifferent to our survival. We have traveled from the riverbank to the ruins of history, from the depths of the human psyche to the static between the stars, and we are left not with an answer, but with a question that demands an answer from each of us. It's a threefold path, a new way of seeing things, and a personal challenge. The first challenge, awareness of nature. Know the scorpion. We must develop honesty about our own inherent tendencies and our own compulsions, the parts of ourselves that are driven by self-sabotaging urges. Take a moment this week. Sit quietly and think of a recurring negative pattern in your life. Instead of blaming others, ask yourself, what is the compulsion, the nature that drives me to repeat this? You cannot fight an enemy you refuse to see or acknowledge. Where is the scorpion in you? The second challenge, awareness of history. Remember the river. Develop an understanding of your past, both personal and collective. Look at your family's history. Do you see patterns of behavior, of addiction, of failed relationships? Are they repeating in your own life? Those experiences provide a map that shows us where the scorpions are likely to appear and which arguments they are likely to use to set traps. What lessons have you failed to remember? The third challenge, awareness of action. Choose a different crossing. This is the conscious act of breaking the behavioral loop. Armed with the awareness of your nature and your history, you can deliberately choose to act differently. The next time you feel the pull of an old pattern, try a pattern interrupt. Do anything different. Pause for 10 seconds before you speak. Walk out of the room. Say no when you would normally say yes. It is the frog finally recognizing the scorpion and remembering the stories of the sting and choosing another path to follow. But this is not an answer. It's a starting point. The true mystery of the scorpion and the frog is not why the scorpion stings, but why the story itself holds such power over us. Its purpose is not to give us excuses for our failures, but to serve as a warning, a diagnostic tool, something for us to reflect upon. The next time you find yourself on the verge of making the same mistake, of trusting the untrustworthy, of participating in a pattern you know that leads to pain, stop, look in the mirror, and ask the question, am I the frog or am I the scorpion? The answer may surprise you. It may be the only thing that can save you from the river's current. As we step back from the crossroads, remember the veil between the known and the unknown is thinner than you think. But the story doesn't end here. This is just the beginning. Because what we explore here is not just about the phenomena, but the journey that we are all on, searching for our meaning and purpose in life, seeking the knowledge and wisdom to solve the deeper mysteries in our universe, and to find and fulfill our destinies. Unexplained sightings, spirits, and science. They are all connected, and they have been interwoven into the grand tapestry of life. So remember, keep pulling at the threads, because this has been Crossroads of the Veil.